Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm your host, Maryfran Johnson, CEO of Maryfran Johnson Media, and the former editor-in-chief of CIO Magazine and Events. This video show and podcast is produced and sponsored by CIO.com and my friends in the digital media division of Foundry, which is an IDG company. We're streaming live to you now on LinkedIn and to our CIO channel on YouTube. And because we are live right now, we most cordially invite our viewers to join us in today's show and send in questions of your own. We have editors watching the chat streams on both LinkedIn and YouTube, and they're ready to pass along your questions as they come in. And my guest today, I'm very pleased to welcome to the show, is Jeff Sippel. He is the Executive Vice President and CIO of Northwestern Mutual. He leads an organization of about 4,000 technologists and is in charge of the company's tech architecture, infrastructure, and cloud services, as well as its information risk and cybersecurity operations. Jeff joined Northwestern in 2019 as the Vice President of Client Planning Experience, where he was leading development of the company's proprietary financial planning platform. But in May of 2022, that fun job came to an end when he was promoted to CIO. At $36 billion in revenue last year, Milwaukee-based Northwestern Mutual is one of the three largest life insurance companies in the U.S., right alongside New York Life and Metropolitan Group. Founded in 1857, 166 years ago, this Fortune 100 company provides an array of comprehensive financial planning services to nearly 5 million customers through life, disability income, and long-term care insurance and annuities, as well as brokerage and advisory services. Before he joined this massively large insurer, Jeff served in numerous leadership, business, and technology roles, including CTO and Chief Strategy Officer at Acorns, which is a fintech company best known for its micro-investing platform. Before that, he was the CTO at Edo Interactive, another financial software company. And then earlier in Jeff's career, he spent 10 years in engineering and product strategy roles at Orbitz Worldwide, where he wrapped up as VP of Engineering. In many ways, Jeff's career path to CIO at Northwestern reflects the considerable impact of combining deep technical capability and understanding with strong business strategy and equally strong customer experience focus. So delighted to have you here, Jeff, to talk about all these things. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Maryfran.
Okay, let's dive in first and talk about this unexpected jog you took in your career path, coming in to the client experience VP role at Northwestern with a lot of technology depth in your background, but no actual CIO experience on the job, and how you're in your first CIO role now at this $36 billion insurance company. Talk about how that transition happened for you.
Well, it was a really exciting opportunity to take on the CIO role here. I mean, in some respects, I would say all the roles that you've highlighted I've had really helped prepare me for the opportunity to be a CIO. You know, when you're at a smaller or an all-digital company, you have to deal with things like cybersecurity, architecture. You have to figure out how you're going to manage all your workforce tools. There isn't anyone else, or that's a collaborative decision. So I think a lot of the domains that a CIO has at a Fortune 100 company like Northwestern Mutual really lend themselves to some of the things that I've done in the past. At the same time, one of the neat things about us as an insurer really is an information company. You know, we take in information, we connect that, we assess risks, and we provide products on top of that information. So it's really a great opportunity for someone who really has a deep understanding of how all the systems are connected. And for me, that intersection of that plus our product and our strategy worlds, I think has really helped me be an advisor to not just leading the CIO function, but really being an advisor to our senior leadership team and the CEO.
Okay. Well, and When we say VP of client experience, that's a loaded term that carries a lot of interesting job duties with it. How is that so important at an insurance company that it actually catapults you into a CIO role? There was something more going on there than marketing, I'm sure.
Right. And client experience here, if you think of the life cycle of how our clients interact with our advisors and the company at large, all of that is inside of client experience. So we think about what, marketing really talks about how do you learn about Northwestern Mutual? How do you have your first contacts? You recognize the company, you learn about and start trusting it. But then you move into talking to an advisor. My background on the financial planning side, we lead with financial planning. So the big part of those initial conversations is, how do we create a financial plan for you and recommend solutions to some of your problems, whether it's I want to retire at this date, or I want to buy a house, or I'm going to have kids. All of those are things that we can help you, as we highlight in our mission, free you from financial anxiety. Those are really stressful decisions. Our client experience helps you, helps work you through that process. So at the end of it, and one of my peers, he talks about saying, am I okay as a client? That's really the question that everybody asks. And that's really what our client experience is trying to answer is, am I going to be okay? If something bad happens, if I want to retire, if I want to, for me, if I want to jump off of a company at Orbitz where I'd worked for 10 years and go really work at the ground floor of another startup, am I going to be okay with the rest of my family? At that point, I had small kids. That was a risky decision, or could have been a risky decision. I wish I would have had a plan like I have now at Northwestern Mutual.
Yeah. Well, and this is, and I know we're going to talk more about it, but this is very based on a financial planning tool. And I mentioned in the intro that it's a proprietary tool. Don't all insurance companies have these kind of planning tools? What is so special or so unique about the work you undertook at Northwestern when you were doing that client experience work with the financial planning tool?
Yeah, so one of the neat things about Northwestern Mutual is, as far as I'm aware, we are the only insurer, or really, only, I would say, wealth manager that has its own proprietary financial planning tool. There are many of these in the market that, independent investment advisors or broker dealers or anyone like that may use. But they're really focused, our observation is they were focused on wealth management and how do I retire, answering questions about things like your IRAs or 401ks, or how do I save up. Your whole financial picture, the risk side of it, how am I going to protect against bad things happening? How do I make sure, whether that's I get disabled, I get sick, or someone in my family passes away. Those are all parts of that conversation, and we just weren't seeing a tool that could have that holistic conversation. And so we did some acquisitions on that space, plus then we spent 5+ years building a tool that right now all of our advisors in the field utilize to have that conversation. It really brings together insurance, investment, and ultimately where are you trying to go in your life as a client, and really provides that full picture so that you can be comfortable. Again, what I said earlier, am I going to be okay?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, the description of a tool that is that broad. To me, having talked with so many CIOs over the years, it sounds like that kind of family jewels that you find in ERP systems, or like the systems of record, because this is involving a lot of your systems of record as well, right? This is probably a very complicated setup with a tool like this.
Well, one of the neat things that we've been able to do by having our own tools, we can connect it to all our systems, like you highlighted. So we have, whether it's a policy admin system or a system of record on our wealth side, we can make sure those are seamless connections to really bring that data automatically into that financial planning process and make it as seamless as possible. And there's a large portion of our engineering teams dedicated to making sure that we're constantly improving that product. while also making sure it operates as seamlessly as possible.
Yeah. Do you now, as the CIO now, you're probably not as deeply involved in working on that tool, but you probably still keep track of it. So what is your role overseeing the work on that now?
Yeah, at this point, what we make sure, as my role, I mean, besides being a cheerleader from the sidelines, and I would say at this point, my hobby is financial planning. I love
Okay.
doing it for myself. The product managers of that product, if they're watching, they will know that I care about them deeply, and I'm talking to them all the time. But what we do is we make sure, from a CIO standpoint, you know, that tool, because it's so essential, we need to make sure it's highly available, highly reliable. It meets the very highest cybersecurity standards because you're trusting it. If we're going to do good financial planning, we need you as a client to trust us with some of the most important information you have, which is your finances, your health, whatnot, in order to do that. So we need to make sure we have the very best cybersecurity. And then we need to make sure it fits in with the ecosystem of the larger environment. So does it meet the standards of our technology? Is it aligned to what we call our target state architecture? All those pieces, just like we do with every other application or set of tools, many of which we build ourselves, we have to make sure it's aligned so that really all these building blocks work together. Otherwise, we can't fulfill that promise of it being seamless, it having all the right data at the right time to make the very best decisions.
Yeah, well, and you'd mentioned too that this is not a one and done. This is something that got worked on for 5 years, and now there needs to be constantly new versions of it.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think this is the one thing that I take away from building products on the digital side and at startups is, you know, a technology company, there is no done. There is no
Right.
project. We build capabilities that we then enhance. And our CEO, John Schlifsky, he loves to talk about how our financial planning tool and many of our tools are like the iPhone. At some point, there was, you know, a version 1.0 of iOS, and now we're on, I can't remember versions.
I don't know.
Yeah, 12, 17.
Yeah.
But every year there's another major version, and often throughout the year there are minor versions that have security fixes and updates and improvements. We operate the exact same way, where we are doing major versions every year, every quarter, and then we're constantly watching our advisors, how they use it, how they react, our clients, what have they reacted positively to, and we're constantly enhancing it. So that requires that consistent care and feeding. It's more unlike building a building, I guess it's more garden, right? You are constantly making sure that all your efforts are rewarded.
Yeah. Well, now, as I mentioned in the intro, this interaction of digital products and strategy and the CIO and technology, it has become so central to the CIO role. But but that's been going on for a little while, for several years now. And if I'd asked you 5 or 10 years ago, oh, are you headed to CIO? You would have probably said no. That job looks impossible to do. So having found yourself in it, how did you make that transition? How did your field of focus have to widen?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things that I've really been proud of in my career is I've been able to operate, you know, really at that intersection of technology, product, strategy. And I think as time goes on, the CIO role really needs to take on more of those capabilities. You need to truly understand what the business strategy is so that you can assess whether the technology you're bringing in, whether it's off the shelf, whether you're building it, whether you're making that buy versus build decision, that you can really make sure it's fit for purpose, both now and knowing where whatever company you're with is in the future. So I think having that combination is really, really essential. And earlier I talked about being that advisor to our senior leadership team, on the flip side, they really look to me to give them intuition on what's possible. I think this is one of the things that I really see as a big part of my job is to kind of open up and expose the organization to what could be possible? What tools could we utilize? What concepts could we take on to really address whatever market problems or strategies we have? It goes both ways. And I think being at the center of that is something, while I wouldn't have probably expected to be a CIO at a Fortune 100 company 10 years ago, if you would have said, do you think you can, and would you want to sit at the intersection of technology and business strategy decisions? I would have said, absolutely, that's exactly where I want to play for the rest of my career.
Okay. Let's pivot to the kind of big picture impact that Northwestern's business and customers have gone through over these last few disruptive years. As you know, we mentioned when we talked earlier, you've had the quote unquote luck to be there through the big business crisis of the pandemic and then the aftermath of it. So tell us about the customer base, how this has all affected them, what has changed in terms of that relationship between Northwestern and those 5 million customers that you have.
Well, I think one of the things, maybe I start with one thing that really hasn't changed, and that's this essential role of our financial advisors in that relationship. We have about 7,000 advisors out there. That human connection to our clients is one of the really important things that I think drives good decision making for our clients and really gives them the confidence in their financial plan. That what we've seen over the course of the past few years is the advisor as a kind of counselor on someone's finances has become really the central connection. Now, what we've been able to do is really add in quite a bit of digital technology. So when everyone had to go remote, our advisors who were accustomed to running around a city, meeting clients at their office, at Starbucks, you know, in their homes potentially, to really work through these challenges, they're now able to do that digitally through, you know, conversations like this. That did two things. One, it made it so they could become more productive. Now, if I don't have to drive 30 minutes to a Starbucks to have a meeting, I might be able to have 2 meetings. That's fantastic. In addition, what we've been able to see them do is get really deep on certain areas. If I'm great and I understand the incentives and motivations of, I don't know, let's say doctors or you know, any industry, I can get really deep no matter where they are in the country. I can now service a much broader population. And I think that's really helped us gain expertise. I think the other piece that we've been able to do is look at all the interactions. This goes back to the client experience side, all the interactions that our advisors or even our customer support folks on the corporate side have, and we've been able to really build efficiencies into there, whether it's really, you know, supercharging our mobile app so that when you have a question about your plan or your finances or what's next, oftentimes you can answer that directly. If you need to do things like change your beneficiary or change your address or things like that, we can do that through our digital tools. And the other neat thing is all those things provide signals to our advisors. If you change your address, as an advisor, I really want to know about that because maybe something else has changed. Maybe you bought a house because you're about to have a baby. Well, that's a conversation that we really need to have. And I'd love to be able to have that so that I can help protect you or help make sure that we're aligned and that I'm adding value every step of your life journey.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that one of your roles especially is to be that viewpoint on the industry and the things that are coming and the changes possible. How do you go about corralling that information and then sharing it with the CEO and the rest of your senior executives? Do you have something like a monthly briefing? Do you just slip it in conversations? How do you go about, you know, sharing that kind of, you know, curating it and then sharing that information with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's both formal and informal communications. We do have things like an innovation incubator that's constantly doing briefings to our leadership team about areas they're exploring. Those are kind of more longer term horizons of innovation, but even as the markets And as world of technology changes, those are things that we try to keep our organization abreast of, either through, like I said, those informal conversations. We also try to connect the entire leadership team to outside experts, whether that's consultants or research firms, or you can imagine in financial services, there's all sorts of folks that are able to provide you kind of signals and intelligence on where the world is going. And we try to make as many of those connections as possible.
Yeah. Well, early in your career, you were at Capgemini and another one of the big management firms doing that sort of thing. How has that advisory role played into the job that you have now? What do you think you do differently maybe than CIOs who come from sheerly tech backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a great question that thinking about it, I think what it probably does is you learn a way of thinking in a consulting world to think about really center your views on the problem that someone is trying to solve. I don't even want to say client, but
Yeah.
I think it allows you to be curious in a very focused way and do things like really understand problems from first principles. So I think that is probably the biggest area where I can apply it. Is I've been able to take a step back, really look at things from a first principles view, and then ask, could we do something different given the new ingredients, if you will, that we have in the mix of technology? I think everybody right now, we haven't talked about AI, but everybody's kind of doing this work a little bit on the AI side. Is like, what fundamental assumptions do I need to change in a world where I have a new tool in my toolbox?
Yes. Well, and funny you should mention that, because AI is absolutely next on my question list. These days, whenever I hear the word productivity, I ask about AI, because Gen AI, you had mentioned it. I think you have something going on with some text assisting or something that you're using Gen AI for. Talk a little bit about that. And is it part of your innovation incubator area, or has it been spreading throughout the various data analysis work and your chief data officer kind of things that are going on there?
Yeah, I'd actually say it's much broader than even that. We have a group, effectively like an AI council, that tries to look across all of the business. And this is not just technologists, it's business leaders, where we're trying to connect, the tool and the toolbox analogies, kind of a good way to think about it. There are lots of areas in a business, like Northwestern Mutual, where we can apply AI, both traditional AI and kind of generative AI. So on the traditional side, finding ways to do more predictive modeling, leveraging things so we can make better decisions. We've been doing that for years or decades. Ostensibly, you can think of actuarials and that whole process as kind of the early precursors to that. On the Gen AI side, really anything where we're predicting conversations, or summarizing conversation is an opportunity to utilize that. And so you brought up, our text areas. Really, you look at summarization of conversations.
Yes.
One of the early places we experimented with that was in our tech customer support. It's a really easy place to implement because it's on my team. So we can implement. And then what we saw was we learned very quickly how to make it and how to scale summarization for using Gen AI, so that we could leverage that, put it back into our contact center tools. Then at that point, the folks that ran our contact centers for our clients, our claims process, all of these folks have very similar processes. They're for different purposes, but you can start leveraging the learnings you have from one area and put it in another area, and then take that to the next level. You think of any place I need to summarize our conversation, whether it's this conversation or a conversation with an advisor, you can see those same tools can be used. And I think we repeat that type of process where we try to get as many learnings quickly about a particular avenue of exploration, and then try to scale it as wide as we can. That's really proven to be valuable for us. And you need all those you need all the business leaders
Hmm.
engaged and involved so that they can connect the dots, not on a technology problem, but on a process or people problem.
Okay.
They can look and say, oh, I have a process that looks a lot like that. Could I use it here? And then the technologists who are also in the room, yeah, you absolutely can and probably should.
Ah, yeah. I know they might be tempted to say, you're not doing that already. You know?
That or or
Or
that.
that, because actually one of the things a lot of people find about software engineers is that they just kind of, they do cut right to the chase, kind of like, well, why aren't you doing that now? Sort of thing. One, I wanted to follow up on one of the things about moving the Gen AI and other AI processors you're using. You had mentioned when we talked earlier that it really highlights how important it is to have your customer data in good order. And so talk about the kind of work that has been going on with you now as CIO and perhaps even before that to do that, because, you've been around for 166 years. Northwestern has a good amount of customer data. You were probably one of the first customers of IBM, back in the day. So, and I'm sure that's true for banks and insurance companies across the country. So zero in a little bit on what that entails today, getting customer data in good and better order, and how you involve your business colleagues in that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we were in fact one of, I think, IBM's first mainframe customers, and that's both a blessing and maybe a bit of a curse because um, you know wind back to 1960-ish, the insurance industry was largely an industry that sold insurance policies. And the
Yes.
way that I like to talk about it is if I wound back to that, there were probably someone who had a form in triplicate with a policy application number at the top. And that, getting technical, a tiny bit technical for a second, like it would be natural as you were digitizing these systems to make that the primary key of all these records. Well, what
Sure.
that meant is 40, 50, 60 years later, you end up with the policy ID as the central concept of your data. But our company and our strategy has moved so that customer, not policy, or even household, is really the center of our client relationship. And so we have to shift with that. And
Yeah.
really that's been the big change that I've been championing is let's move to a customer-centric data model.
Mhm.
We've really been working over the past couple of years as part of our broader technology strategy to build a centralized customer record. And these aren't new concepts. So this is not like we're innovating on the concepts themselves, but moving 100, as you highlighted, 160 odd year old company
Yeah.
to something that's where the data model is as client centric as our business strategy has been a trick and a challenge because it's not like I can rewrite everything.
Yep.
Stop business, tell our advisors, go take a 9-month vacation while we rebuild
Mm.
all the systems. We have to operate while we do this. And
Yes.
and that migration and change has really been it's been an amazing challenge, amazing opportunity. And the teams, I think one of the neat things that I've seen is that the teams at Northwestern Mutual immediately understood why we needed to do this. In fact, many of them had been championing this concept for years. They saw the writing on the wall. We just needed to listen to them and let them execute.
Yeah.
We've just seen amazing progress on us connecting, from our CRM systems to our policy administration systems, and then to our financial planning tools. And we're really starting to see the benefits of whereas we might have cobbled together client-centric things. If I change an email address on a client, it might need to go to 20 different systems because we stored email address in each one.
Yes.
And that might take batch cycles and hours or even a day for it to propagate. When
Yeah.
those things happen instantaneously, everyone from the advisor to the client to our support teams see the benefit. They're like, wait, that just happened instantly. I no longer have to do all the things or can
Yeah.
explain away all the reasons why it was slow. I just know it's fast and done.
Hmm.
For the CIOs and people listening that don't have that kind of legacy of challenges, the only thing I can say is just wait a couple decades, and I
That's
think you'll start to see this. It also means that it's really important to have a good sense of where you're going, because
mhm.
you can do this along the way. And I think one of the debates we have in the technology community is, how do you manage that constant care and feeding and communicate that to the larger leadership, so you get to do this and you get to constantly be with the business team, not catching up.
Yes. Well, and if you're not talking about it in business terms, you'll have a lot of eyes crossing pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been skirting around that whole issue of legacy systems for a minute or two here now, and I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. Where are you in the technical debt journey, or maybe you call it modernization there? It may be a move to the cloud. When you think about that, that core, you probably somewhere in the company still have one of those original IBM mainframes. So where is Northwestern in that journey, and how are you getting there? And I ask all that with the understanding that legacy is never ever gone. I mean, I've had a lot of CIOs tell me that Microsoft systems they put in 7 years ago are now their legacies.
Mhm.
So, with all that in mind, what is your journey like there for the company?
Yeah, I like to think of it really as, and this is why we talk about target state, because really it's just the distance between current state and target state is what we get concerned about, or what we evaluate. And
Mhm.
the further you get from that, really, then you just have to evaluate how impactful that is and what limits that's putting on your aspirations as a business.
Mhm.
Within that context, we're a few generations removed from those original mainframes. But and to be clear, there are a lot of processes that a mainframe does really, really well. That's one of the things that we actually have to keep in mind, is for incredibly cheap batch processing, mainframes like kind of are a great tool. That's what they were built for. They work really well. The challenge is not, are they inexpensive or reliable or things like that. It's is the business logic embedded in those processes, is that valid? Do we want to reuse that in a wider set of domains? Do we need to make it? Do we need to reuse it in a real-time fashion? These are questions that we ask. Those are really the impetus for maybe modernizing
Mhm.
those particular avenues. I would say, like, our goal is to really understand what are the opportunities and what are the risks that we have with something that's very distant from our target state, and that's
Mhm.
how we prioritize.
Okay.
We also have really tried to tackle these problems kind of incrementally. I think when we talked, you had talked to, I think in one of your earlier shows, someone had called it kind of like strangulation, right? That's
Yeah.
a pretty common term on this, where we identify ways to um, insulate our overall systems from the areas that we want to modernize, build interfaces in front of it that are modern and we can rely on, and then eventually we just modernize the business logic behind it at the pace that it makes sense. We've
Yes.
actually de-risked the process along the way there, because we have a modern interface in front of it. Now what we're doing is removing the risk of like legacy tech that maybe it's hard to find engineers for, or maybe it's not aligned to our cybersecurity principles that we have. All of
Mhm.
those things be reasons why we do it, but we've done it in a way that maybe is safe for the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Uh, that is a I don't know, Jenga puzzle type level of analysis that my enterprise architecture team, they think about that every day, and they say, like,
Yes.
what's the next little, I guess, wooden block, if we're using that analogy, that we're going to pull out to make sure that we keep moving along, but doing it in a way that the whole tower doesn't fall.
That's actually a very good analogy of what it is like, because you could move a piece out of there and have a little bit of a rock slide somewhere else in the organization. You had mentioned that you've got a good portion of your infrastructure in the cloud now. Do you find that are your vendor partners and your suppliers, are they urging you to go even more to the cloud? Is the ultimate, it often seems when I listen to the vendor community and what the tech industry is saying, they want everything in the cloud. And that has never seemed realistic to me for companies that in insurance and banking and, with that enormous amount of customer data, especially from a cybersecurity standpoint. So what do you hear from your suppliers about that, and how much does that influence your thinking?
Well, I mean, I think if you talk to the cloud providers, they're almost obligated to tell you that you should move everything to the cloud. So
they're obligated to lie to you then.
Well, not necessarily lie, but like that's their incentive, right? They are running a cloud business. And I think will we get to a world where almost everything is in the cloud? That is potentially a future. You look at the flip side of it, are we going to be operating small to medium sized data centers inside our office buildings? I think we've probably sorted out that that's not a future that anyone anticipates. The scale and innovation that these large providers can bring, whether it's co-location companies or cloud, is really, difficult for even a Fortune 100 company. Like we're not investing billions of dollars in data centers. Microsoft, announced in our neck of the woods here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that they're investing several $billion in a number of data centers that they're going to build over the course of, call it 6 months. That is a scale of investment that we have to find a way to leverage. It's a huge opportunity. And I think even on the cybersecurity side, much of the innovation in the cybersecurity world is happening in SaaS providers and cloud providers. So I think you're seeing this as an avenue and an engine of innovation. Which is a great thing for us. Like we are able to take advantage of that. Now, along the way, are we forcing ourselves to move things to the cloud because we like, the term cloud versus on-prem
data center?
Data center, like that's not why we're doing things that allow us, really to be able to be more productive, run things at either really run things more cheaply. That could be like a lower base cost. It could be that we can take advantage of kind of scalability to deal with flexes in our demand, and then also really align to talent and skill sets over the long term, so that we make sure we have the right people working on these things, and that can happen in a variety of ways. So I'd say we hear from folks; they have opinions all the time, and in a lot of cases, we are partnering and innovating alongside whether it's cloud providers or our partners in a variety of ways.
Yeah. Are you finding, especially since the pandemic years and all the changes that had to happen in a lot of tech organizations, are you finding that it is easier to establish a partnership kind of relationship with the tech suppliers and the vendor community? Or is it kind of the same old issue about, like, this is going to save you so much money, but it will take 10 years? I mean, there's always a lot of, I guess, enthusiasm and promises in any kind of new technology. I think we're all seeing that with AI these days. So are you finding more opportunities for partnership from the tech suppliers?
I think our partners at least at Northwestern Mutual have been, very collaborative. We try to keep good relationships and really focus our relationships at a strategic level. Make it so that we are, as much of the time, we're not talking about cost and delivery, although those are important considerations. We want to understand where are they going and how aligned is that to where we're going. And the overlap of where our strategies kind of align, and we've seen this in a number of places where as we start talking, we realize that there are opportunities that maybe we didn't anticipate. And I think having those constant conversations at a strategic level really help us uncover the places where we can work together.
Okay.
Um,
That makes
so
sense.
we really, and look, you can't do this with every partner you have, but the ones that are big and are strategic,
Mhm.
we really try to keep at that level because I think you brought up earlier, how do we bring in information about the state of technology or IP? One of the avenues is seeing where our suppliers are moving.
Yeah.
Understanding where they're moving gives us a lot of information on what's the future going to look like.
And you had mentioned that innovation incubator. Tell us a little bit more about that. Is that, do they bring in kind of people from the research labs at big tech vendors, or do they travel around a lot? I've heard so many CIOs talk about taking their entire leadership team out to Silicon Valley, and wandering around for a couple of days, meeting with, startups and that kind of thing. How much of that do you do at Northwestern? And is that what the innovation incubator folks are busy doing?
Well, our incubator, I mean, they are constantly talking across not just Silicon Valley, but any place there's where we can bring ideas and innovation into Northwestern Mutual,
Mhm.
um, and really looking at it pretty far out from a horizon standpoint. My teams are at various points talking. They've done trips not just to Silicon Valley, but we have one of our big offices is in New York, and we are able to
Mhm.
bring in some of the best of interesting startups, but also innovation inside of larger companies as well to really identify where we can and where we should move forward.
Okay.
I think this is really to maybe answer your question, like we encourage and I encourage all of our teams to have connections to the research community, have connections to the wider technology industry, because you never know, like it's not just one person's job to find out where that next area of innovation is going to be. It's
Mhm.
kind of my team's job.
Yeah. Well, and as I think you pointed out at one point when we were talking, that technology is always a team sport. So
Mhm.
it is that kind of thing. Let's pivot over to talk about, I mentioned the 4,000 or so technologists you have in the tech organization at Northwestern. What is the scope of and the organization of how you've got all those brilliant folks working for you
Yeah.
to deliver the value that you need to the rest of the business? Talk about that a little bit, about kind of the size and scope and how you have everybody organized.
Yeah, so we at NM we really have that split into kind of two main areas. We have our delivery organization, this application developers, product managers, whatnot. They're in a group that is really focused on delivering the application capabilities,
Mhm.
and that's led by actually a peer of mine. And then on the technology side, as we talked about earlier, cybersecurity, enterprise architecture, infrastructure, workplace, and then all the feedback mechanisms, whether it's like customer support or application support or reliability, all those areas we have together. And we really run as one unit because all of those areas all feed into each other. As we talked, we just spent a bunch of time talking about the cloud. And
Mhm.
as we move more things to the cloud, it has to be architected. We have to understand what the right architecture is for a cloud-based application. And then we don't just lift and shift things into the cloud. We make sure that they're ready to be cloud enabled if we're going to move it. That requires all those teams working together and also communicating to our business partners on the other end that this is all happening. Because if we really talk legacy applications, there's a period of time where we were loading applications onto people's laptops. That's probably your 1990s era
Yeah,
Windows app.
yeah.
I'm sure there's a few of those in Northwestern Mutual that we're not going to cloud enable that. but we are going to rebuild that into a platform that makes more sense. And so I think all of those folks come together. That's generally how we have it that we have the organizational structure to manage, what is, in some ways the engine of of an information company like an insurer.
Yeah. And do you, with a team that large, do you have essentially kind of a second level of CIOs that are more directly, they report to you and they report also maybe into one of the business unit presidents? Do you do that sort of structure?
So one of the unique things about Northwestern Mutual is we really have one P&L. We do not have divisions that have their own P&Ls, which is very cool. It means we can run a very integrated strategy. What that means is the organization is actually divided functionally. There's a leader for cybersecurity. There's a leader for infrastructure. There's a leader for application engineering and development. And those folks own the entire scope of the business for that domain, which means we can really take advantage of scale, but that's why I highlighted, they each need to coordinate very closely with each other. Cybersecurity, our CISO, for example, is a CISO for everything and needs to work with each of the areas to make sure that they are maintaining the highest level of security or meeting our standards and policies in that area across the board. For us, because our business is also organized that way, it's worked really, really well.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned too that you've worked at Orbitz was a global company as the VP of engineering. You were dealing with teams all around the world. But you said one of the benefits at Northwestern was that you've only got 4 time zones to deal with instead of 12.
To be clear, our business is US based. So our advisors, our leadership teams, most of our employees are in the United States. We do use some providers who are outside of those 4 time zones, but it really does allow us to focus and get really close to the business and connect to the problems at hand. So that's been the coordination has been a little bit simpler here.
Yeah. Now, as we're heading into the remainder of this year and then 2025, which sounds like such a huge futuristic number, when you think about the way time passes, what are your most pressing talent acquisition and retention strategies? How are you approaching this future that you've got so many moving parts to deal with?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I think we're seeing is we're really focused at this moment on talent retention.
Yes.
Versus, I think, you rewind a couple of years and really talent acquisition and getting the right people who had those skills was essential. For the most part, we have great folks that are aligned to our strategy on the team right now, and making sure we can retain them, we can grow them, give them a career that they really value and appreciate and that challenges them is essential for us here in Northwestern Mutual. One of the neat things that to take something that I've done at other organizations is we've implemented a technical career track here. So that has, I think, really given a home for someone who is a great engineer or a great cybersecurity person or an amazing product manager, but doesn't want to grow by building a team and you find out afterwards that your primary job is to manage a team. There are some people I love personally, that team building and team management, but I know a lot of folks, and earlier in my career, I probably thought I was one of these who I just want to be a leader of technology.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've been able to implement here, and that I think has been received really well from those technologists who do want that to be their career path. You see this at Google and Amazon, and when we were at Orbitz, we did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really an essential part of having a great technology culture and organization is you need people who can be those aspirations for the person straight out of school who's like, I love writing software, or I love building infrastructure. What can I do? And you see someone who's been doing it for 20 years, loves it, and is focused on
Yeah.
being the very best technologist they can. It's a really cool thing. And we've seen that really pay dividends already in terms of engagement and retention.
Yeah. Well, and you'd mentioned too at Northwestern, you have you have probably 4 generations of workers that are at the company. I mean, there's newbies, there's kids out of college, all up to people that have been there for 40 years. The how how do you approach bringing in outside talent to that? I mean, it's great to have, I mean, you're based in Milwaukee. I imagine how much of your team is remote now, working in other states and other areas?
We actually have a sizable number of remote workers, especially on the technology side. And this is a challenge. I think this is really going to be one of the human resource challenges of coming years is we with the pandemic, with our digital tools, we were able to attract and make productive folks no matter where they were, just like our advisors, no matter where they were in the world, in the United States for us. And then the question is, how do you give those folks a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a career path within your company? And you have to make sure all these things that were kind of embedded and implicit become explicit. And, do I think we have this totally figured out? Absolutely not. Do I think we recognize it's a challenge? 100%. And I think one of the neat things we have going for us at Northwestern Mutual, maybe this is just like a Midwest thing, is having lived outside of the US, outside of the Midwest, is this really notion of collaboration and relationship building is really strong at Northwestern Mutual.
Yeah.
And I think that connection and that need to be connected, I think helps us when we bring in remote folks, when we identify gaps in talent. That I think that's one of the reasons we've really understood that we need to identify talent, not just in Milwaukee, not just in New York, but like across the United States and the world, is there are simply things that we need done, that there are skills that don't exist in the markets we're at, or at least don't exist yet. And we need to go find the right people to work. And then we need to make sure they're engaged and aligned to where we're trying to go as a company.
Well, and I've seen this happen a lot with technology professionals, where the great big corporate entities, it becomes too difficult for them to feel deeply connected, to their mission and their purpose, and they head off to startups. I mean, very much the way you did when you joined different financial planning companies, software companies. How do you take what you learned from working in those collaborative environments and apply it to a tech organization with 4,000 people in it? What are some of the approaches that you've introduced that kind of bring that feeling to the much bigger organization you're in now?
Yeah, I think just having that, and I think this is one of the nice things about having a mix of folks that have been here a couple of years, folks that have been here 40 years, people from inside the organization and outside, is really I try to just highlight and bring in concepts that help us move towards whatever strategies we have. As just the world becomes more digital, becomes more aligned to kind of how technology teams work, it really is a team sport. And so I think really bringing that notion into the company and thinking about the implications of how we might work differently, that's really been an area where I've tried to be vocal about it. I think one of the nice things is, when I brought up the collaboration and relationship nature of our culture, people have accepted it with open arms. There's not like a hesitation to do this. That's really great, because I think they see, well, this is how I wanted to operate anyways. I'm now just seeing that this is an opportunity for us to tweak how we organize and really be that, really make it a team sport, whether it's at the senior level or at the individual, scrum team level, if you will.
Yeah, that does sound like a very coach-like kind of attitude. As a technology leader, have you always had this sort of coach team sport approach? How has your leadership style grown or changed as you've gone from advisory roles, strategy with like Capgemini, and then on through engineering, and now into the CIO role?
Yeah.
How I'm thinking that it's impossible that you'd be the same type of leader you were 15 years ago as you are now. So what have you learned, and what would you like to advise others who are interested, maybe getting more interested in a path to CIO?
I think there's probably two big learnings that I've had over my career that have helped me. The first one is, I mentioned this earlier, at some point, if you are a technologist, like your aspiration, probably, at least it was in my case, to just be the very best technologist I could be. And that kind of singular focus on being a great individual contributor, and just being great at my job, that worked in that fashion. But if you want to expand your leverage and you want to be a great manager, you want to run a great team, you have to invert that, and you have to figure out ways to get your team members to be the very best they can be. Everybody has their own style there, but I think at least being aware that you have getting over the hurdle of what your job is, that was a big hurdle. And that, for me, happened relatively early in my managerial career, I guess. Okay. I think the next hurdle that I think really was the thing that you realize when you become a CIO, or as you really are a business leader first, you happen to run a technology organization. I think it's really helpful to have a solid foundation in technology concepts, engineering, et cetera, so that that is not the thing you have to learn, because you have to expend your energy and your time on the peers you have, whether it's the CFO or the CMO or the heads of various business lines in whatever context you have. Those are your peers, and those are the folks you need to make sure understand the challenges you have and understand the challenges your business have, and connect the dots, because they're going to help you achieve all the things you need done. So that your peer set is so different that learning how to talk in their language, we've talked about this a number of times here, is that business strategy side, I think, has really been the thing that I've had to lean on most over the past 2 years.
Okay. Well, and when I think of all the many hundreds and thousands of articles that were written in technology, media, and those kind of publications over the years, it was always about technology people learning about the business. And it almost, with all the popularity of AI and the fact that we're walking around with little supercomputers on our cell phones now, I almost feel like the paradigm has reversed itself a bit, and that people on the business side are really open to learning more about technology and taking part in these kind of discussions. But I don't know, maybe I'm being a Pollyanna about that. It sounds like you might be seeing that kind of effect at Northwestern.
I mean, I think you really can be that wilderness guide, if you will. Sometimes I use that. We all know where we want to go, but you need sometimes some help getting there. And that as technology as the guide to help show you the way, I think you're onto something there. Okay.
All right. Well, that's very kind of you. And it's been really great talking to you today, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, if you joined us late today, you can watch the full episode later today here on LinkedIn, but also on CIO.com and on our CIO channel on YouTube. Leadership Live is also available as an audio podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And I hope that you enjoyed listening in on this conversation today with Jeff Sippel, who is the EVP and CIO of Northwestern Mutual. I'll be back again later this month on Wednesday, June 26th, with CIO Marty Menard of Pacific Coast Companies. If you want to be sure you don't miss any of these wonderful chats with CIOs, do take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll be happy to alert you when a new one lands. You'll find more than 125 previous episodes of Leadership Live there, as well as several spin-off international editions of the podcast, which is featuring CIOs from Canada, India, New Zealand, and Australia. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks again to Jeff. And everybody take care, and I'll see you here in a few weeks.